Boker Tov, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to the Aliyah day. I am glad that you are here. Glad to be with you this morning, Baruch Hashem. We are in Parsha Beshalach this morning. Yesterday, we touched a little bit on the Song at the Sea, and we talked about the Song of Miriam and the role of women, the role of men, and we covered those topics. And now in the fifth Aliyah, we come to the part at which we receive the manna in heaven, and which brings up some other practical topics for us. The fifth Aliyah begins actually in the last verse of the of the 15th chapter. And then it goes right into chapter 16. So in the fifth Aliyah, it says they arrived at Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 date palms. They encamped there by the water. As an aside, the land of Israel is referred to as a land of milk and honey. And there is an interesting point to be made about the honey of milk and honey. So, and this just so you know, the honey is actually not the honey from bees. Nothing wrong with bee honey, by the way. It's completely kosher. It's one of those paradoxes, I think, of kashrut, because we're not allowed to eat bees or any other insect except for I just went blank. What do you call them? Locusts. Yeah. I know a lot of you typically, particularly in the summertime, most of you love to have barbecued locusts. It's actually part of your, brisket, barbecued locusts. It's very common. Smoked locusts, locusts etouffee. A lot of you love that kind of stuff. But you're not allowed. That's the only insect you're allowed to have. Just kidding. But you are allowed to eat locusts, by the way. But in any case, it's not the bee honey. So it's actually the honey that comes from dates. The honey that comes from dates. Yes, grasshopper, locust, grasshopper. Yeah. So there's that. So just so you know, so if you've never had date honey, it's delicioso and zeyofe. So you should try it sometime. To me, it's a little bit like sorghum, which I actually like sorghum a lot, and molasses and sorghum. So kind of similar to that. My mother, growing up, probably because of her very deep South upbringing, my mother was raised in you couldn't get much more. You got any more South than where she was, you'd be in the Gulf of Mexico. But she used to eat a lot of, I guess she still does, eat a lot of the Burr Rabbit molasses. That was always something as a little boy, whenever it was cold, she'd say, it was Burr Rabbit outside. Anyway, that's my mom. Isn't that endearing? Has nothing to do with what we're talking about here. I guess it kind of does. But anyway, enough about me. Let's talk about you. The journey from Elim and the entire assembly of the children of Israel arrived at the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month from their departure from the land of Mitzrayim. The entire assembly of the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The children of Israel said to them, if only we had died by the hand of Hashem in the land of Egypt, as we sat by the pot of meat, when we ate bread to satiate, for you have taken us out to this wilderness to kill this entire congregation by famine. What's really disturbing here is that in the wilderness, and again, we need to be able to see ourselves as all of us having been set free from Egypt, right? So this is us. Like in the wilderness, don't make the mistake of reading these stories and saying to yourself, boy, those people were foolish. I would never act like that. Don't make that mistake, because the reality is we are very much like this on a daily basis. And it's a mistake to look down our noses, so to speak, at our forefathers in the wilderness and somehow pretend that we're so much better than they are. Truth is, we're not. And here we have a situation in which God has miraculously redeemed us. We've just had the song at the sea. We've just had this amazing, unbelievable. It's not just the parting of the sea. It was more than that. It was the manifestation of Hashem, and this incredible experience where we're closer to God than we ever have been. And yet we come to a point where the very next challenge we run into, the very next adversity that we face, we are ready to abandon our faith and go back to Egypt. And ladies and gentlemen, we have to recognize in a lot of our times we're kind of schizophrenic, or we're manic depressive or whatever, spiritually speaking, in that, oh, I'm really for this today. And then next thing you know, at the other side of our mouth, we're talking against it. And if you recognize that in yourself, now the only thing I can tell you or advise you is to deal with it. I mean, here we have a shocking story that we've come to a point where we're hungry and we're kind of, at this point, the commentators would say that our provisions that we had packed, the lunch that we had packed when we left Egypt, those provisions had run out. And instead of turning to God and trusting Hashem and saying, Hashem, what are we going to eat? Or just saying, God, we're hungry, please feed us, or whatever we would say. Instead of doing that, our immediate reaction is, better for us to die in Egypt. We at least would have died with a full stomach. It's really shocking. But again, if we apply this to our daily life, ladies and gentlemen, if we are in need, or we face an obstacle, or we face a challenge, I know it's the natural reaction is to worry. The natural reaction is to be pessimistic. That's natural and normal. And no, you're not a weirdo for feeling that way. And yet what we need to do is to dig down deep and extract that godliness, that holy light that we find within ourselves, and bring to the surface bitachon. This is where bitachon comes in. When we lack something, we have to understand that only Hashem can provide it. You need to understand that ein od milvado, there is nothing but Hashem. In fact, I'm going to type this. Just give me a quick second. I'm going to type this in the little chat feature, because I want you to understand this. Some of you know it already, but I want you to understand this little phrase, ein od milvado. There is nothing but Hashem. And so whatever we have, whatever we need, only He can provide. He is our only hope. Okay. He's our only hope. There is no other hope. And I don't care what the situation is. I don't care if you're running low on gas and you're kind of looking for a gas station and you're like, hey, I need to find a gas station here in the next corner or two. Fortunately, in our country, gas stations are, if you're in the city, pretty much everywhere. But in other countries, that's not the case, like in Israel and so on. But anyway, doesn't matter. But suppose you're looking for gas or something more serious than that. God forbid it's a medical situation. God forbid it's a relationship situation. Whatever the case, my point is no matter what, you're looking for your keys or you're looking for a cure, God's your only hope. Hashem is your only hope. There, you need to understand. You need to understand that Hashem is your only hope. You have to reach out to and trust in Hashem. Now, here they're not trusting in Hashem. They are they're reverting back to a slave mentality. So in verse 4 it says, Hashem said to Moshe, okay, which by the way, this is a very frequent phrase in the Torah, especially now during the book of Shemot and book of Leviticus and so on. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe, Hine, behold, I shall rain down for you food from heaven. Let the people go out and pick each day's portion on its day, so that I can test them whether they will follow my teachings or not. So now we're having the manna. Now let's look at an insight here as it relates to the complaining. This is from Rabbi Monk's commentary. I'll be reusing Rabbi Monk today. It says the pressing need for the institution of the Sabbath is now made clear. Interesting, right? So we have, what is the need for this, for the Shabbat, and how is it related to the complaining that's going on in this case? After Israel departed the oasis of Elim and re-entered the wilderness, the entire community of the children of Israel, even the righteous. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that's another valid point right there. We'll just pause and say, everybody was complaining. There's none righteous, no, not one. This is where humility, if you missed the Rebbetzins class yesterday on humility, then you need to check it out, the Musar on humility part 2. But we all need to be humble and understand there's not anybody who's righteous. We're all we're all susceptible to sin, and we have to be careful about it, and we all have to understand that even the righteous were complaining, and they complained against Moses and Aaron. I can't imagine what it must have been like to be Moses and Aaron. Here you are in a position of leadership. All you're trying to do is help people. All you're trying to do is just be a faithful, your best you can, and compete. And people just complaining against you all the time. It's challenging. Listen, if you've been in a position of leadership, you know that you are inundated by what we call here in America Monday morning armchair or easy chair rather quarterbacks, right? They've never played the game. They've never been under that kind of pressure, right? But they love to tell the could haves, would haves, and should haves, right? And critique. Can I just tell you something right now? I'm going to give you an encouragement, especially in this day and age. And I believe that if we will take this, all of us take this encouragement, we will be better people. Okay? That's right, Angela. Parents are teachers too. Wow. Parents to teachers. Yes, you're right. But here's the encouragement I want, and in this day and age, with the advent of social media, which is a blessing, 33% a blessing and 66% a curse. Resist the temptation to be critical. Resist the temptation to be critical, particularly with respect to something you know very little about, and most especially with respect to a circumstance that you have never actually been in. Resist the temptation to be critical. You know, there's a story about the Baal Shem Tov. Let me just add this to that admonition, and then we'll get back to our insight here. There's a story about the Baal Shem Tov that as a young man, fairly young teenager, 16 or 17 or so, he was going to a cheder. A cheder is a Jewish primary school. And the teacher was harsh on the students. His wife, the cheder was what took place in the teacher's home, the melamed. And anyway, the wife was short with the students as well, and the house was unkept and dirty, and the students themselves were unruly and wild. And the Baal Shem Tov, he just couldn't stand it. He couldn't take it. So he was in his heart and in his mind critical of the teacher, critical of the wife, critical of the students. So he very often would leave the cheder and just go to the forest and pray and try to be alone in solitude. One day he went to the cheder. Excuse me. He went to the cheder, and he just couldn't take it anymore. So he left and went to the forest. While he was davening in the forest, a man appeared. Turns out this man was a tzaddik, was a traveling tzaddik. It wasn't an angel in this case. And the elderly Jewish man approached him, and he called him by name. And he said, Israel, because that's what the Baal Shem Tov's given name was. His name was Israel. He says, Israel, I want to give you a blessing. And Israel was shocked. He said, who are you? He said, it's not important. I just want to give you a blessing. And he said, okay. And he said, Hashem should give you eyes to see. Hashem should give you eyes to see. And that was it. And after that, the elderly Jewish man went on his way. Israel pondered that for a moment, and then he went back to the cheder. And when he went back to the cheder, something miraculous happened. Suddenly, he saw that the reason the teacher was short with the students and kind of abrasive was because he was overwhelmed with the stress of poverty and other stresses of life. He noticed that the reason the wife was herself short with the students is because, and the house was unkept, is because she was overwhelmed with trying to take care of children and not having enough food to eat and always being concerned with just their daily sustenance. And he also saw things about the students. Why they were unruly. He saw beyond their behavior, and he began to see the root cause. Hashem had given him eyes to see. And as a result of that blessing, the story goes that the Beisht, ever since then, he would look beyond people's faults and beyond their exterior behavior. And Hashem had given him an ability to see into their hearts, if you will, and to see that there was something causing that behavior. And it stirred within him a fierce love of all Jews. In his case, the love of all Jews. And he would begin to see and understand that there was something beyond. This is where Hasidism developed the idea to see the good in everything and everybody. Because somebody may be experiencing an abrasive nature, but you don't know what's going on in their life. Maybe they're having such an abrasive nature because their child is dying, God forbid, of brain cancer in the hospital, and they don't know how to express their sorrow without just being abrasive. Maybe there's somebody that you know who doesn't really have a friendly nature, but maybe they're suffering because of some pain in their life. So the point is that may Hashem give us eyes to see, and so instead of being critical, which is very easy to do, it's very easy to be critical. And interestingly, it's interesting to me that very often we're critical about things we know very little about. And when we actually have been in those situations, we tend to be not so critical. Why? Because we empathize. I find it interesting, Angela had mentioned teachers. If you're a teacher, you're generally not all that critical of teachers. Why? Because you've been there, done that. But if you've never been a teacher, you tend to be super critical. And then when you get to the class, you're like, I could teach that class. I can't believe that. What a loser. And you get to the class and you're terrible, which, by the way, is normal. Because once you go from being in the ranks to being in the front, everything changes. And even if you're in the ranks and you know everything that's supposed to be said, when you get out in front to lead, you forget it all. Happens every single time to every single person. It's just, so the point is, don't be critical, but may you have eyes to see. The people did not have eyes to see, and therefore they were critical of Moses and Aaron, and yet they had never been in Moshe and Aaron's place. It says the miracle of Israel's delivery in Exodus with all the teachings received at Marah became suddenly meaningless. This is, of course, the bitter waters of Marah. Which, by the way, the sages talk about those bitter waters of Marah, and they say that really the water wasn't bitter. If you read the actual Torah, it literally says the people were bitter. Ladies and gentlemen, it is our bitterness that makes the water bitter. It's not the water. Too many people are trying to change the water without changing themselves. If you change yourself, the water will be fine. Everything crumbled before the menacing specter of hunger. So what is it that is what we're saying here is that we can easily be thrown off, and hunger is one of those things that can easily throw us off. It goes on to say, our sages tell us, Kashin mezanotav shel adam, Bekiraat yam suf, the provision of one's daily bread is as difficult as the splitting of the Sea of Reeds. Pesukim 118a. Understand this. God providing, the provision of daily bread is just as difficult as the miracle of the sea, as the Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds. He goes on to say, the threat of hunger, be it real or imagined, causes one to overlook all his principles and commitments. As long as a man is not freed of the anguish caused by the uncertainty of his sustenance, the goals of the divine Torah cannot be realized. The obsession for security can be managed only with the awareness that one's food, the most basic of his many needs, does not rest solely with him. And this became the lesson of the Shabbat. Okay, so we're circling back to why is the Shabbat? Let me go ahead and hide this person. Excuse me. Hide user. This is why is the Shabbat? What does it have to do with this episode? And the answer is because this situation we find ourselves in. We're trying to constantly make provision for us, and we're not trusting Hashem. And understand that Hashem making provision for us is a miracle, just like the Red Sea. See, we're always Hashem, we need a miracle like the Red Sea. We're wanting God to split the Red Sea. We don't understand that every time Hashem makes provision for us, we've just experienced the parting of the Red Sea. Every time Hashem makes provision for us, we've just experienced the parting of the Red Sea. And the Shabbat becomes necessary. Why? Because on the Shabbat, we are required to stop. You're not allowed to work on Shabbat. If you're in a situation now where you're having to work on Shabbat, then you need to make every effort. Do whatever you need to do. Talk to your employer. Do whatever you need to do not to work on Shabbat or Yom Tov, if the Yom Tov happens to fall on a work day. You're not allowed. You're not allowed to go grocery shopping. You're not allowed to. And when I say not allowed, you don't need to look at this as, oh my gosh, I'm being constrained. That's how we look at it, because that's a slave mentality. You're not allowed to make other people work for you. God is saying, stop, rest. And here's what it comes down to. And if we really analyze our thoughts on this, a lot of times when we don't want to stop working on Shabbat, or we don't want to not go to the grocery store, or we want to go to that garage sale, or that whatever is going on, that we got to go, or that whatever, we're not trusting Hashem. It comes down to, I don't trust Hashem. It says, in this area, as in so many others, man is merely responsible to do his best while believing truly that his ultimate success will be attained through the help of God. So this is what the Shabbat does for us, is it tells us that, look, we're supposed to do our best. So you have to go to work, you have to make a living, but understand that even when we do our best and we go to work and make a living, it's still Hashem who's providing for us. But the Shabbat, taking that rest, it has so many implications, but one of them is, hey, I'm resting because this is a declaration that I don't trust myself for everything. That my ultimate trust is in Hashem. Nathan, Hashem is the God of creation, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So it says here, food from heaven. Incidentally, God tolerates. We could ask the question, okay, so we're not trusting God. We want to go back to Egypt. Why doesn't God just strike us dead? Because God understands our weakness. God understands that we're human. In fact, there's a dictum within Judaism, particularly Hasidic thought, that when someone is going through a difficult time, something really challenging, a divorce, God forbid, a sickness, a sick child, God forbid, a difficulty financially, whatever the situation is, and they cry out to God and they say things like, God, why did you let this happen? God, what's wrong? Or whatever. They kind of like get on God's case, so to speak. Did you know that they're not to be rebuked? That Judaism teaches that God tolerates their seeming disrespect. This goes for all of us. I say they, but it goes for all of us. And the reason is because he understands our grievance. We're humans, right? It's normal for us to, when we're going through something so difficult, to cry out. It's normal. We're not robots. But also, and this is important, it is a demonstration of our faith. If we're going through something challenging and we cry out with tears sometimes, or maybe with a little bit of frustration or anger, God, why? That is a demonstration of our faith. We believe that God is in control. We believe he's in control. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking to him. So Hashem says, all right, you believe I'm in control. This is a great place to start our conversation. So it's okay. Somebody that's doing this to God in the midst of a situation, it's okay because they have faith, and plus we're human. So God tolerates us. And what does he do? He answers us. Hashem said to Moshe, Vayomer no Moshe, Hineni, ma'atir lechem min hashamayim. I will send them bread from heaven. What does it mean, bread from heaven? Lechem min hashamayim. Lechem can be bread, or it can be translated food, because manna wasn't really bread, although it kind of was. But it can also be food. Food and bread are kind of interchangeable as words. It says in the Talmud, and Rabbi Akiva states that the manna was called heavenly bread, the food of angels, Yoma 75b. So what do angels eat? They eat manna. What is manna? Manna, ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, is the radiant glory of God. That's ultimately what manna is. It says, our sages also tell us that manna was created at the conclusion of creation. This is from Pirkei Avos 5:8. It is a spiritual food reserved for the righteous in the world to come. This is found in the Talmud in Hagiga 12b. In the Midrash, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai observes that the Torah was given for the interpretation only to those who ate the manna, Mekilta. The reason for this, explains the Zohar, is that food is an essential factor in man's ability to comprehend eternal truths. This is why we have the kashrut laws. Kashrut is more than a diet plan. It's actually a moral, spiritual plan to elevate our ability to intake supernatural understanding. If you're not eating kosher, if you're eating treifa, like I don't eat kosher, but I eat biblically clean. There's no such thing as biblically clean. Okay, you're eating treif, or you're eating, God forbid, forbidden foods, then you are stifling your ability to take in divine light. That's what kashrut's all about. This is why Hashem said at the end of the kashrut laws in Leviticus chapter 11, he gives us the reason for kashrut. It's not about health. It's not about organic diet. It's not about cleanliness. He says, do this so that you can be what? Holy as I am holy. There's a holiness to the diet. It has nothing to do with whether or not something is healthy. People ask me all the time, is GMO kosher? Well, yeah, it can be, yeah. Now, and it shocks a lot of people, and understandably so. And the reason it shocks people is because people have been taught that kosher has something to do with our physical health. No, it doesn't. It has to do with our spiritual health. Can kosher be healthy? Sure. Salmon is a whole lot better than catfish. Oh my goodness. And beef, pork is like poison. Okay. Yeah, for sure. Okay. But not always, because you can have a kosher donut. You have kosher Twinkies. Okay. It's not about your physical body. It's about your spiritual body. And that's what people need to understand. So it says, unwholesome and fatty foods dull the heart and make it indifferent. Refined foods enable the spirit to ascend to the knowledge of God constantly. This is one of the key steps in developing our ability to understand Torah. Finally, it says that manna fell in the morning because it was a manifestation of divine glory, for its origins were of supernatural nature. The manna fell directly from heaven. This is why Yeshua refers to himself as the manna from heaven. He is the manna from heaven. That's why he says you have to eat of this spiritual essence. Why? Because esoterically, Yeshua is a manifestation of the Shekinah of God, the glory of God. Actually brings this down quite beautifully in the Zohar as it relates to Memtet. But basically, Memtet is a manifestation of the Shekinah. The Shekinah is God, and yet the Shekinah is very often and Kabbalic literature, the Shekinah is God, but very often separated from God. Like, for instance, the Shekinah is in exile, whereas God is in Shemayim, but yet they're one and the same thing. And the Memtet is the manifestation of the Shekinah. And the Shekinah is literally the source of the manna. In fact, in Mishpatim, which is the Rebbetzim's parasha, the elders go up to the mountain with Moshe and they have a feast. The sages say, what are they eating? It says they're eating of the Shekinah of God. So when Yeshua says, I am the manna from heaven, what he's talking about is I am the Shekinah. And if you want to live, you have to partake, spiritually, of course, of the angel food, which is me. And when we do that, that's when our eyes are open, our hearts are open, and that's where God gives us eyes to see. End of our Aliyah today. Shalom to all of you. Thank you so much for being with me. May you have a beautiful, wonderful, glorious day. We'll look forward to seeing everybody tomorrow with God's help. Until then, just have a peaceful day. And don't be critical. The Musar that Rebbe Singh gave us yesterday was to try to avoid conversations that involve I, like I did this and I said this and I thought this and I went here. And I would include in that, don't be critical. Be empathetic. Shalom Aleichem, everybody. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow.